While his wife was fighting for her life in yet another round of chemotherapy, he chose to go out to dinner with his mistress. But what was supposed to be just another night ended with news so devastating, it made him faint in front of everyone. The corner office on the 42nd floor of the Prescott Tower offered a panoramic view of San Francisco that most people only saw in postcards. Nathaniel Nate Prescott stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, hands clasped behind his back, watching the late afternoon fog roll in beneath the Golden Gate Bridge. At 48, he cut an imposing figure, 6'2", with salt and pepper hair that enhanced rather than diminished his appearance, giving him the distinguished look of a man who had earned his success rather than inherited it. "The Morgan Portfolio Projections, Mr. Prescott," said his assistant, placing a folder on his hand-carved mahogany desk. And Mrs. Prescott called. She said not to worry about picking her up. Dr. Reinhardt will drive her home after the appointment. Nate turned, his expression flickering almost imperceptibly before settling back into its usual confident mask. "Thank you, Jessica. You can head home early today." As the door closed, Nate loosened his custom Italian silk tie and poured himself 2 fingers of 18-year-old Macallan from the crystal decanter on his credenza. The amber liquid burned pleasantly as he swallowed it in one practiced motion. 17 years ago, Prescott Investments had been nothing more than Nate, a laptop and a rented desk in a shared office space. Now it managed over $6 billion in assets, and his name carried weight in financial circles from New York to Tokyo. The view from his window showcased a city he had conquered, yet lately, it felt like the fog was not just outside, but creeping into his perfectly constructed life. 3 miles away, in a sterile room at the UCSF Medical Center, Maeve Prescott sat in a reclined chair, a clear tube running from an IV stand into the port in her chest. At 45, she still possessed the warm smile and thoughtful eyes that had caught Nate's attention when they were graduate students. Her normally lustrous chestnut hair was gone now, replaced by a stylish emerald silk scarf that matched her eyes. "How's the new novel coming along?" asked Sybil Reinhardt, her closest friend since their doctoral days, as she sat beside Maeve with a stack of literary journals. "I've managed 20 pages this week," Maeve replied, her voice steady despite the chemicals flowing into her body. "My department chair thinks I'm crazy for keeping up with writing during treatment, but honestly, Sybil, it's the only thing keeping me sane." As an English literature professor at USF, Maeve had spent her career analyzing great works, but had only recently found the courage to create her own. The irony that this courage had arrived alongside her cancer diagnosis wasn't lost on her. Sybil squeezed her hand. "Your students miss you. The substitute they hired can't pronounce half the Russian authors' names." Maeve laughed, wincing slightly as the movement disturbed her port. "Poor Dostoevsky is probably rolling in his grave." The oncology nurse approached with another bag of medication. "Last one for today, Professor Prescott. How are you feeling?" "Like I could run a marathon," Maeve said with a wry smile. "Or at least make it to the bathroom without this rolling companion." She patted the IV stand. As the nurse adjusted the medication, Maeve's mind drifted to Nate. He had insisted on attending her first 2 treatments, sitting stoically beside her, answering emails on his phone when he thought she was napping. She had seen the strain in his eyes, the helplessness that men like him, men accustomed to solving problems with money or influence, felt when faced with something they couldn't control. "You don't need to come to every session," she had told him last night, touching his face as they lay in bed. "I know how busy things are with the Meridian acquisition." He had captured her hand, kissing her palm with unusual intensity. "I should be there. Sybil will be with me. Besides, it's just more of the same, me dozing, nurses checking vitals, boring stuff." She had offered him the escape she sensed he desperately wanted, but wouldn't ask for. Relief and guilt had warred in his eyes as he'd finally nodded. The Prescott's Pacific Heights mansion stood as a testament to their success. A meticulously restored Victorian with modern amenities hidden beneath historical charm. From their rear terrace, they could see Alcatraz and the bay, a view they'd once shared nightly with glasses of wine and conversations about literature, politics, and dreams. The master suite featured a framed photo from their wedding day. Nate in a classic tuxedo, Maeve in a simple satin gown, both laughing as they looked at each other rather than the camera. They'd met at Stanford when he was finishing his MBA and she was beginning her doctoral studies in English literature. Their connection had been immediate and unexpected, the ambitious business student and the thoughtful literary scholar finding in each other the balance they didn't know they needed. "You make me think about more than profit margins," he had told her on their third date. "And you remind me that there's a real world beyond 19th century British novels," she had replied. They had built their life methodically, his meteoric rise in finance paralleled by her steady academic ascent. The decision not to have children had been mutual. Both were devoted to careers that demanded everything they had. Instead, they had filled their home with art, books, and friends, creating a life rich in everything but offspring. Until 3 months ago, when a persistent cough and unexplained weight loss had led to tests, specialists, and finally the diagnosis, stage 3, Hodgkin's lymphoma. Maeve had taken the news with characteristic calm, immediately researching treatment protocols and success rates. Nate had responded by throwing money at the problem, second opinions from oncologists across the country, researching experimental treatments, hiring a nutritionist specializing in cancer patients. "We'll beat this," he had promised her, a vow that sounded more like the closing of a business deal than a husband's comfort. "The Q3 projections look fantastic, Nate," said Vanessa Reed, leaning close to point at a chart on her tablet. Her perfume, expensive but subtle, filled the space between them at the corner table of Quince, San Francisco's 3-Michelin-star restaurant. "The Meridian acquisition is going to position us perfectly for Asian market expansion." At 32, Vanessa embodied ambition in its most alluring form. Her corporate consultancy had come highly recommended, and in the 8 months since she'd begun working with Prescott Investments, she had proven herself not merely competent, but exceptional. Her analytical mind rivaled Nate's, and her instincts for market trends had already saved his company millions. Her physical attributes, those hypnotic emerald eyes, the glossy brown hair that fell perfectly around her sculpted face, the figure showcased by impeccably tailored suits, had initially been incidental to her value. Until New York. They had traveled there 3 months ago for meetings with potential East Coast clients. After a particularly successful dinner, riding high on verbal commitments from 2 major pension funds, they'd found themselves sharing a bottle of champagne in the hotel bar. 1 drink had become 3, and professional boundaries had blurred as conversation shifted from market strategies to personal histories. "My father was a high school economics teacher," she had revealed, surprising him. "He died when I was 15. Before that, he used to make me read the Wall Street Journal every morning and give him a summary." "That's quite the education for a teenager," Nate had replied, seeing beneath her polished exterior to the driven girl who had clawed her way into the financial elite. "It was a better education than business school," she'd said, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that communicated more than words. They had ended up in his suite, their connection as much about shared ambition as physical attraction. Afterward, lying in tangled sheets, Nate had felt a complicated mixture of exhilaration and self-loathing. "This was," he had begun. "Inevitable," she had finished for him, running a finger along his jawline. "And discreet." The affair had continued in stolen moments, late nights at the office, business lunches that extended into the afternoon, carefully orchestrated meetings in upscale hotels. It was during this time that Maeve had received her diagnosis, compounding Nate's guilt while paradoxically driving him further into Vanessa's arms. With her, he could escape the helplessness he felt at home. With her, he was still the powerful, decisive man he had always been. "How's the wine?" Vanessa asked now, watching as Nate swirled the ruby liquid in his glass, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Excellent," he responded automatically, then set the glass down. "The chef prepared a special tasting menu for us, 7 courses. The private dining room at Quince insulated them from prying eyes, allowing a level of intimacy that would have been impossible in the main restaurant." Vanessa's hand rested on his thigh under the table, a gesture both possessive and reassuring. "Is Maeve feeling any better after this round?" she asked, her tone carefully balanced between concern and detachment. Nate tensed slightly. "The doctors are pleased with her response to the treatment. The tumor has already shrunk significantly." "That's wonderful news," Vanessa said, squeezing his leg. "She's strong. She'll get through this." "Yes, she will," Nate agreed, guilt flaring, as he pictured Maeve in the treatment chair, Sybil beside her instead of him. Their first course arrived, a delicate composition of sea urchin, caviar, and gold leaf. They ate in appreciative silence, the exceptional food momentarily suspending the complications of their relationship. After the waiter departed, Vanessa set down her fork and fixed Nate with a serious expression. "I need to tell you something important." Nate felt a flutter of anxiety. "Is there a problem with the Meridian deal?" "No, it's personal." She took a deep breath. "I'm pregnant, Nate." 8 weeks? The world seemed to tilt beneath him. That's not possible. We've been careful." Apparently not careful enough. Her green eyes held his, unblinking. "I've done 3 tests. There's no doubt." "What are you planning to do?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper despite their private room. "I want to keep it," she said simply. "I know the timing is complicated with everything else in your life, but..." Nate's mind raced through implications, calculations, scenarios. The same analytical process he applied to investment strategies, now frantically assessing personal catastrophe. Maeve fighting cancer, a pregnant mistress, his carefully constructed life collapsing like a house of cards. "I need time to process this," he said finally, reaching for his wine with an unsteady hand. "Of course," Vanessa replied, "but we don't have unlimited time before decisions need to be made." Before Nate could respond, the door to their private dining room opened without a knock. Both turned, expecting the waiter with their second course. Instead, Sybil Reinhardt stood in the doorway, her normally friendly face hardened into a mask of disgust. Her eyes moved from Nate to Vanessa, then to their proximity, the wine, the intimate setting. "Well," she said, her voice arctic, "this explains why you couldn't be bothered to sit with your wife during her chemotherapy today." Nate felt the blood drain from his face. "Sybil, don't," she cut him off with a raised hand. "I just stopped by to pick up some food for Maeve. She's finally feeling well enough to eat something after today's treatment." Vanessa maintained her composure, her face betraying nothing as she casually removed her hand from Nate's thigh. "Dr. Reinhardt, I presume. I'm Vanessa Reed, a business associate of Nate's. We were just discussing the Meridian acquisition." Sybil's laugh was short and bitter. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" She turned her attention back to Nate. "Do you have any idea what Maeve told me today while poison was being pumped into her veins to save her life? She was worried about you, about how stressed you've been, about how to make things easier for you." Shame washed over Nate in sickening waves. "How is she?" he managed. "How do you think she is?" Sybil snapped. "She's fighting for her life while her husband is..." She gestured at the table, unable to complete the sentence. "This isn't what it looks like," Nate began, the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "It's exactly what it looks like," Sybil countered. "And you know what's truly despicable? Today her doctor told her that despite the aggressive treatment, her body is showing remarkable resilience. She even said something that seemed impossible, that the preliminary blood work shows irregularities consistent with pregnancy." Nate's world stopped spinning entirely. "What?" "That's right," Sybil continued, her voice trembling with rage. "By some miracle your wife is pregnant, 4 months along. The doctors are calling it extraordinary that the fetus has survived the first rounds of chemo. She was waiting to tell you when she was sure the baby would be okay." The room began to blur around the edges of Nate's vision. Pregnant? Maeve was pregnant. After years of believing children weren't in their future, after her cancer diagnosis, after his betrayal, the cosmic cruelty of it was unbearable. Dimly he heard Vanessa saying something, felt her hand on his arm. He saw Sybil's face, twisted in contempt. The competing revelations, Vanessa pregnant with his child, Maeve pregnant with his child, both women facing uncertain futures because of him, created a perfect storm of shock that his system couldn't process. "I need to go to her," he said, or thought he said as he stood up too quickly. The room spun violently. His last conscious thought before darkness claimed him was that he was falling, not just physically, but morally, spiritually, falling and deserving every painful second of the impact to come. The rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor pulled Nate back to consciousness. White ceiling tiles came into focus. Then the antiseptic smell of hospital disinfectant filled his nostrils. He tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness forced him back down. "Take it easy," Sybil's voice came from his left, clipped and clinical. "You hit your head when you collapsed." Nate turned to see her sitting in a vinyl chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. No longer in her casual clothes from the restaurant, she wore scrubs. A reminder that before she was Maeve's friend, Dr. Reinhardt was one of UCSF Medical Center's top neurologists. "Where am I?" he asked, his mouth dry. "California Pacific Medical Center, ER. The restaurant called an ambulance after you fainted. She checked her watch. You've been out about 40 minutes. Memory flooded back. Vanessa's pregnancy announcement, Sybil's interruption, and then, Maeve, he gasped. You said she's pregnant. Sybil's eyes narrowed. I lied. The words hung in the air between them. What? I made it up. Maeve isn't pregnant. I wanted to see your reaction. She leaned forward. And your reaction told me everything I needed to know. Relief and confusion battled within him, followed quickly by anger. You had no right. Save it, Sybil cut him off. I've been watching you pull away from Maeve ever since her diagnosis. At first, I thought it was just the typical response of a spouse confronting mortality. But then the missed appointments started, the late nights at the office, the mysterious meetings. Her voice hardened. How long have you been sleeping with that woman? Nate closed his eyes, the monitoring machine registering his increased heart rate. 3 months. Jesus, Nate. Right when Maeve started treatment? Sybil's disgust was palpable. Does your girlfriend know she's just a cancer escape hatch? It's not like that, he protested weakly. Then what is it like? Enlighten me. But Nate had no explanation that didn't sound pathetic even to himself. The silence stretched between them. Finally, Sybil spoke again. Is she really pregnant? Your corporate barracuda? Nate nodded, the reality of it sinking in deeper. She says she is. Well, congratulations, Sybil said bitterly. While your wife fights for her life, you've been creating new life with someone else. Poetic, in a thoroughly despicable way. A nurse entered, checking Nate's vitals and informing him the doctor would be in shortly. After she left, Sybil stood and gathered her bag. Maeve thinks you had a stress collapse during a business dinner. That's what I told her when the restaurant called me. She moved toward the door. What you tell her now is up to you, but if you don't tell her the truth, I will. I'll tell her, Nate said quietly. Sybil paused at the doorway. You know what breaks my heart, Nate? Maeve still loves you. Despite everything, the cancer, your emotional absence, she still believes in your marriage. Whatever you say to her, remember that you're not just ending a relationship. You're destroying her faith in 20 years of her life. With that, she was gone, leaving Nate alone with machines and monitors that couldn't begin to measure the damage he had done. 2 days later, Nate sat in the living room of their Pacific Heights home, watching as Maeve processed what he had just told her. She sat perfectly still on the antique settee they'd found in Provence years ago, her silk headscarf making her pale face seem almost translucent in the afternoon light. How far along is she? Maeve asked, her voice unnervingly steady. 8 weeks. And you've been seeing her since New York? That's 12 weeks ago. Nate nodded, unable to meet her eyes. Right around when I was diagnosed. It wasn't a question. Maeve, I'm so sorry. I know that doesn't begin to... What are you going to do? She interrupted, still in that calm, detached voice that was somehow worse than if she had screamed or thrown things. I don't know, he admitted, but I want to fix things with us. I'll end it with her. I'll do whatever it takes. You'll do whatever it takes, Maeve repeated softly. Will you turn back time? Will you undo the moment you decided that your comfort was more important than our vows? Will you make me forget that while I was fighting for my life, you were creating a new one with someone else? I made a terrible mistake, the worst mistake of my life. No, Nate, a mistake is forgetting an anniversary or saying the wrong thing during an argument. What you did was a choice, a series of choices made day after day. Her composure cracked slightly, a tremor entering her voice. Do you have any idea what it's like to sit in that treatment chair, poison flowing into your veins, wondering if you'll live to see another summer? And the one thing, the one person I thought I could count on, wasn't there. I want to make this right, he pleaded. What you want doesn't matter anymore, Maeve said, finally meeting his eyes. You've already lost me, Nate. The only question now is what you're going to do about your child. The finality in her voice struck him with physical force. 20 years of partnership dismissed in a single sentence, not with anger, but with a sad certainty that cut deeper than rage ever could. Where will you go? He asked, realizing even as the words left his mouth how selfish they sounded. I'm not going anywhere right now. I can't exactly apartment hunt while undergoing chemotherapy. She stood shakily. But I'll be looking for my own place as soon as I'm stronger. In the meantime, the guest room will do. A week passed in tense cohabitation. Nate slept in the guest room, leaving for work before Maeve woke and returning after she had gone to bed. He communicated with her via notes left on the kitchen counter, offers to pick up groceries, reminders of her medication schedule, questions about her comfort that went largely unanswered. On Friday morning, a text from Vanessa appeared on his phone. "We need to talk. Coffee at 1 p.m, sight glass on 7th. The industrial chic coffee shop was busy with the lunch crowd when Nate arrived. Vanessa sat at a corner table, her usual professional polish slightly dimmed. Dark circles beneath her eyes suggested sleepless nights, and her typically perfect makeup seemed hastily applied. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down. No kiss on the cheek, no hand on his arm. The shift in their dynamic was immediate and obvious. "Of course," he replied formally. "How are you feeling? Physically? Morning sickness is brutal. Emotionally?" She gave a humorless laugh. "About as well as can be expected." A barista delivered 2 coffees, his black, her decaf latte. The small detail that she remembered his coffee preference felt like a twist of the knife. "I did a prenatal DNA test," Vanessa said without preamble. "The results came back yesterday." Nate felt a cold weight settling in his stomach. "And? The baby isn't yours." The world seemed to stop, then restart in slow motion. "What?" "The father is Elliot Chambers." She named the CFO of Westridge Capital, one of Prescott Investments' main competitors. "Elliot, you've been sleeping with Elliot Chambers?" Nate's voice rose, drawing glances from nearby tables. "We had a thing before you and I." Vanessa looked down at her coffee. "It wasn't serious, but it happened occasionally. The timing lines up with him, not you." Nate felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. "So I destroyed my marriage for nothing." "It wasn't nothing to me," Vanessa said defensively. "I didn't plan for any of this to happen." "Does Elliot know?" "Not yet. I wanted to tell you first." The irony was almost too perfect. The master strategist outmaneuvered on every front. His wife had cancer. His mistress was pregnant with another man's child. His carefully constructed life had been reduced to rubble in less than 2 weeks. "I'm sorry, Nate," Vanessa said, reaching for his hand across the table. He pulled away from her touch. "Are you? Or are you relieved it's not complicated by me?" Her silence was answer enough. "I assume our professional relationship is over," he said flatly. "I think that would be best," she agreed. "I've already informed my firm that I'm stepping down from the Prescott account. Jackson will take over the Meridian acquisition." Nate stood, leaving his coffee untouched. "I wish you luck, Vanessa. With the baby, with Elliot, with whatever comes next." "Nate, wait." But he was already walking away, pushing through the cafe door into the bright San Francisco afternoon, a man untethered from everything he had once believed defined him. The following weeks brought the systematic dismantling of Nate Prescott's carefully constructed world. At Prescott Investments, rumors spread despite his attempts at discretion. His executive assistant, Jessica Chen, noticed the changes immediately. Cancelled meetings, uncharacteristic tardiness, the haunted look that had replaced his confident demeanor. Marcus Delaney, Prescott's chief investment officer and Nate's friend since their Stanford days, confronted him in the executive washroom after a particularly disastrous meeting with potential investors. "What the hell is going on with you?" Marcus demanded, checking that they were alone. "You just told the Delaware pension fund that we're considering cryptocurrency investment. We explicitly decided against that strategy." Nate splashed cold water on his face. "I misspoke. You've been misspeaking a lot lately. The Vanessa Reed situation is none of your business," Nate cut him off sharply. "It becomes my business when it affects this company," Marcus countered. "People are talking, Nate. The board is concerned. Let me worry about the board." "That's just it. You're not worrying about anything except your personal disaster." Marcus lowered his voice. "Look, I know about Maeve's cancer. I can't imagine how difficult that must be. But whatever's happening between you two, whatever happened with Vanessa, you need to get it together or step back." The words stung precisely because they were true. Nate had always prided himself on compartmentalization. Personal issues never affected his business judgment. Now his concentration was shattered, his decision-making compromised by guilt and self-recrimination. That evening, he called an emergency meeting of Prescott Investments Executive Committee. In the sleek boardroom overlooking the bay, he made the announcement that shocked his leadership team. "Effective immediately, I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations," he told them. "Marcus will serve as interim CEO, while I take a leave of absence." The reaction was a mixture of concern and relief. By the end of the meeting, a transition plan was in place, one that would allow Prescott Investments to continue functioning while its founder attempted to reassemble the pieces of his shattered life. 3 months later, the first fundraiser for the newly established Prescott Foundation for Cancer Support took place at the Legion of Honor Museum. Nate stood at the podium, addressing a room filled with San Francisco's elite. "When cancer enters your life, it doesn't just attack the patient. It transforms entire families," he said, his voice steady but humbled. "The Prescott Foundation aims to provide what my family didn't have: comprehensive support for patients and their loved ones through the entire cancer journey." The foundation had been Nate's focus since stepping away from Prescott Investments. He had channeled his business acumen and network into creating an organization that would fund everything from childcare for parents undergoing treatment to mental health services for caregivers. What he didn't mention in his speech was that Maeve had moved out 6 weeks earlier, into a small but charming apartment near the USF campus. Their divorce proceedings were amicable, but proceeding steadily. She had declined his invitation to the fundraiser, though she had expressed written support for the foundation's mission. After the event, as staff cleared away the evidence of the successful evening, Nate sat alone at a table overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge. His phone buzzed with a text from Maeve. "Heard the event went well, congratulations." He stared at the message. A small olive branch extended across the chasm he had created. With careful fingers, he typed back, "Thank you. How are you feeling?" The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. "Good days and bad, more good lately. Last round of chemo next week. Can I bring you anything?" he asked. A longer pause this time. Finally, "Actually, could use a coffee and conversation. Crossroads Cafe tomorrow, 2 p.m. Nate felt an unexpected surge of hope, not for reconciliation, but for something perhaps more valuable: forgiveness. Crossroads Cafe sat on the edge of the Hate District, far from their usual upscale haunts. Maeve had chosen neutral territory, a place without memories of their shared past. She was already there when he arrived, seated at a corner table with a ceramic mug between her hands. The silk scarves had given way to a short pixie cut of new hair growth, still thin but undeniably present. Her face had regained some color, though her cheekbones remained sharply defined from the weight loss. "You look well," Nate said as he sat down, meaning it. There was a vitality in her eyes that had been missing for months. "Liar," she smiled faintly, "but thank you for the attempt. The hair is coming back at least. My oncologist says that's a good sign. Can I get you anything else, a pastry?" "I'm fine with just coffee for now." She watched as he fidgeted with a sugar packet. The foundation launch looked impressive. The Chronicle gave it good coverage. "It's a start," he said. "We've already funded support groups at 3 hospitals. It's a good thing you're doing, Nate." He looked up, surprised by the genuine tone of approval. "I wanted to create something meaningful out of—" He trailed off. "Out of the wreckage?" she finished for him. "It's okay, we can acknowledge what happened." They sat in silence for a moment, the ambient cafe noise filling the space between them. "How's the novel coming?" Nate asked finally. Maeve's face brightened. "Actually, that's partly why I wanted to meet. My agent, yes, I have an agent now, sent the manuscript to publishers last month. We got 3 offers. Maeve, that's incredible. I signed with Scribner yesterday. It'll be out next fall." She hesitated. "It's somewhat autobiographical, not explicitly, but there are elements of us in it." Nate absorbed this. "Will I come off as the villain I was?" "There are no villains in my book, Nate. Just people making complicated choices for complicated reasons." She sipped her coffee. "Besides, I changed enough details that no one who doesn't know us intimately would make the connection." Another silence, more comfortable than the last. "I heard about Vanessa," Maeve said carefully. "About the baby not being yours." Nate's jaw tightened. "News travels fast. San Francisco is a small town in some ways." She studied him. "Are you relieved? Relieved that I didn't father a child with my mistress while my wife was fighting cancer?" "Yes." He shook his head. "But also furious at myself for destroying what we had for nothing." "Not nothing," Maeve corrected him. "For escape. For comfort when things got hard." She set down her mug. "I've had a lot of time to think about us, Nate. About what happened. In my support group, they talk about how cancer reveals the truth of relationships. Some grow stronger. Others crack under the pressure. We cracked," Nate acknowledged. "You cracked," she specified without rancor, but I'm not without responsibility. I was so focused on survival that I didn't see you drowning. That doesn't excuse what I did. No, it doesn't, she agreed. But understanding context isn't the same as offering absolution. Nate studied her face, the face he had woken up to for 20 years, the face he had betrayed. I'm proud of you, he said simply. For the book, for how you've handled everything. I'm trying to be someone you could be proud of too. Maeve reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, the first physical contact they'd had in months. I see that you're trying. That matters. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But as Maeve shared details about her book and her improving health, Nate recognized it for what it was. A beginning of something new from the ashes of what they had lost. 2 months after their cafe meeting, Nate's phone rang at 3:17 a.m. He fumbled for it in the darkness of his new downtown apartment, instantly alert when he saw Sybil's name on the screen. What's happened? He asked, already swinging his legs out of bed. Maeve's in the ICU. Sybil's voice was tight with controlled panic. Her fever spiked to 104, and her white count bottomed out. She's septic. I'm on my way, he said, grabbing clothes from a chair. UCSF? Yes, 6th floor. She hesitated. Nate, it's bad. The infection hit hard because her immune system is still compromised from the chemo. 20 minutes later, Nate stood outside the ICU, watching through a glass partition as medical staff worked around Maeve's still form. Machines beeped, IV lines snaked to her arms, and an oxygen mask covered half her face. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. Sybil approached, wearing rumpled clothes that suggested she'd been there for hours. She complained of fatigue yesterday, but insisted on teaching her seminar anyway. By evening, she was disoriented. I found her unconscious in her apartment when she didn't answer her phone. What are her chances? Nate asked, his voice a whisper. Before Sybil could answer, a slender Asian-American woman in a white coat approached them. Mr. Prescott, I'm Dr. Eleanor Chen, Maeve's oncologist. Nate shook her hand mechanically. How is she? Critical, but stabilizing. The next 24 hours will tell us a lot. Dr. Chen's direct gaze was compassionate, but unflinching. Maeve developed neutropenic sepsis, a serious infection that took hold because her immune system is severely compromised from treatment. But she was doing better, Nate protested. Her hair was growing back. She said the last round of chemo was working. Cancer treatment is never linear, Dr. Chen explained. The chemotherapy was effective against the lymphoma, yes, but it left her vulnerable. This setback isn't unusual, though it is serious. Can I see her? Dr. Chen nodded. Briefly. She's heavily sedated and won't recognize you, but some studies suggest patients can still sense presence even in unconscious states. Inside the ICU room, the antiseptic smell was overwhelming. Nate approached the bed cautiously, as if Maeve might shatter at his touch. Her breathing was shallow beneath the oxygen mask, her skin waxy with fever. He took her hand, so much thinner than he remembered, and leaned close to her ear. I'm here, Maeve. I know I wasn't before when you needed me, but I'm here now. Please fight. Her fingers remained limp in his, no sign that she heard or felt him. Nate stayed until a nurse gently told him he needed to leave, promising to call if there was any change. In the waiting room, Nate found Dr. Chen typing notes at a small desk. Doctor, can I ask you something? She looked up. Of course. Did this happen because of stress? Because of what He couldn't finish the sentence. Dr. Chen closed her laptop. Mr. Prescott, cancer doesn't care about marital problems. Neutropenic sepsis is a medical complication, not an emotional one. But stress affects the immune system. I've read, You're looking for ways to blame yourself, she interrupted, her tone matter-of-fact. That's human, but not helpful to Maeve right now. What can I do? He asked, desperation edging his voice. Be present without expectations. Support without demanding forgiveness. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Maeve spoke of you often during treatment, before and after your separation. She's never stopped caring about you, even when she was angriest. Nate swallowed hard. I don't deserve that. Deserving has nothing to do with it, Dr. Chen replied simply. Love isn't a meritocracy. Now go home, get some rest and come back tomorrow. Maeve's fight is just beginning. While Maeve battled infection in the ICU, Prescott Investments faced its own crisis. Marcus Delaney called an emergency meeting with Nate at their attorney's office downtown. The SEC has opened an informal inquiry into our trading patterns, Marcus explained, sliding a document across the conference table. They're focusing on 3 deals from the past year, all ones Vanessa Reed consulted on. Nate scanned the paper, his exhaustion from 3 sleepless nights at Maeve's bedside momentarily forgotten. What exactly are they looking for? Potential insider trading, information leaks. Marcus looked grim. The timing of certain trades by Westridge Capital has raised red flags. They seem to have positioned themselves perfectly ahead of our moves on at least 2 occasions. Westridge Capital, Elliot Chambers' company. Elliot Chambers, the father of Vanessa's child. "So you think Vanessa was feeding him information?" Nate asked, the pieces clicking into place. "It's circumstantial at this point, but the pattern is suspicious." Marcus hesitated. "There's something else. Finance flagged unusual consulting payments to Vanessa's firm, significantly higher than our standard rates and some without proper documentation." Nate felt physically ill. Not only had he betrayed his wife for Vanessa, but it appeared Vanessa had been betraying him professionally all along. "I need to look into this myself." "Nate, you're on leave. Let our legal team handle—" "This is personal now," Nate cut him off. "I'll need access to all communications between Vanessa and anyone at Prescott. Email, text messages, meeting notes, everything." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "That's a lot of data. Then we better get started." 3 days later, Maeve's condition had stabilized enough to move her out of the ICU. Though still weak and requiring IV antibiotics, she was conscious and lucid when Nate visited. "You don't have to come every day," she told him, her voice raspy from the oxygen mask she'd recently shed. "I want to," he replied, arranging a small vase of daisies on her bedside table, her favorites, not showy roses or lilies that might have been more impressive. A knock at the door interrupted them. A tall man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes entered, carrying a stack of books. "James," Maeve said, her face brightening, "you didn't have to bring those now. Your students' papers won't grade themselves," he replied, with a warm smile that faltered slightly when he noticed Nate. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize you had company. James Sullivan, this is Nathaniel Prescott," Maeve introduced them. "James is heading the department while I'm on medical leave." The men shook hands, sizing each other up with the instinctive wariness of territorial animals. Nate noted the casual way James set the books down, his evident familiarity with Maeve's hospital routine. James observed Nate's protective posture beside Maeve's bed, the intimacy of ex-spouses still bound by complicated emotions. "The faculty sent a care package," James told Maeve, producing a canvas tote. "Tea from Rebecca, homemade cookies from Darren, though I told him hospital food would be better, and the English department's famous Get Well Soon card that everyone wrote in. Tyven Davidson, who never signs anything." Maeve laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. "Tell them all thank you. I'm hoping to be back for spring semester." "Take the time you need," James said. "We've got things covered." He looked at Nate again. "Nice to meet you, Nathaniel. Maeve's told me about your foundation work. Impressive stuff." After an awkward moment, James made his excuses and left. When the door closed, Nate turned to Maeve with a raised eyebrow. "He seems attentive," he observed carefully. "James has been very supportive," she replied, neither confirming nor denying the implication. "He organized the department's schedule so my classes were covered without losing my position." Nate nodded, feeling a strange mixture of jealousy and gratitude that someone had been there for Maeve when he had not. "He seems like a good man." "He is." Maeve changed the subject. "How's your investigation going?" Nate had mentioned his suspicions about Vanessa during earlier visits. "Slowly, but I'm finding things that don't add up." "Be careful," Maeve cautioned. "If she's been working with Elliot Chambers all along, they could be dangerous adversaries." "I can handle Elliot and Vanessa," Nate assured her. "Can you?" Maeve's gaze was penetrating. "You couldn't before." The comment stung, but Nate recognized its truth. "I'm seeing things more clearly now." Sybil Reinhardt's office at UCSF Medical Center reflected her organized mind. Medical textbooks arranged by specialty, research papers in neat stacks, family photos precisely aligned on her desk. She listened without interruption as Nate laid out his suspicions about Vanessa. "So you think your mistress was industrial espionage wrapped in a pretty package," she summarized when he finished. "And now you want my help exposing her?" "I need someone who understands digital forensics," Nate explained. Your research on neurological imaging uses advanced pattern recognition algorithms. Similar principles apply to analyzing communication patterns. Sybil looked skeptical. I study brains, Nate, not corporate emails. But you have contacts. That conference you spoke at last year, the one on medical data security. There must have been people there who specialize in this kind of analysis. She studied him for a long moment. Why are you really doing this? Revenge because Vanessa played you? Or something more? Justice, Nate said simply. For my company, yes. But also for Maeve. Everything that's happened to her, the stress during her treatment, the separation when she needed support, it all traces back to Vanessa's manipulation. Careful, Sybil warned. You made your own choices. Don't rewrite history to cast yourself as just another victim. I'm not. I know what I did, Nate insisted. But if Vanessa deliberately targeted me as part of a corporate espionage plan, that adds another dimension to the harm done to Maeve. Sybil sighed, then opened her laptop. I do know someone. Emily Winters, cybersecurity expert who helps medical institutions protect patient data. She owes me a favor. She typed briefly, then looked up. But my help comes with a condition. Name it. When this is over, whatever you discover, you let Maeve decide what happens next. No heroics, no grand gestures. Her choice, her terms. Agreed, Nate said without hesitation. I'll contact Emily. Sybil closed her laptop. Now get out of my office. Some of us have actual lives to save today. Maeve's apartment welcomed her back a week later, transformed by the care of friends. Fresh flowers brightened the living room. The refrigerator was stocked with easily prepared meals, and a new recliner had been installed, perfect for resting while still upright enough to read or write. The department pitched in, James explained as he helped her settle in. Rebecca organized the food rotation, and I'll be checking in daily. Maeve sank gratefully into the recliner. You've all been too kind. Not at all. James pulled up a chair. How are you feeling, really? Like I've been hit by a truck, then the truck backed up and hit me again. She managed a weak smile. But alive, definitely alive. And you're writing? Will you continue with the novel? More than ever. Maeve gestured to her laptop on the side table. During those days in the hospital, barely conscious, I had the strangest clarity about the ending. It's like my subconscious figured it out while my body was fighting to survive. James leaned forward, intrigued. How does it end? Not how I originally planned, she admitted. I thought it would be a story of forgiveness, of moving beyond betrayal. But now I see it's about justice, not revenge, but a reckoning that forces truth into the light. Powerful distinction, James observed. Revenge destroys everyone involved. Justice, properly understood, can be healing. Exactly. Maeve's eyes lit with the passion that made her such a compelling professor. My protagonist doesn't seek to destroy her husband or his mistress. She simply ensures they face the natural consequences of their actions. James smiled. I sense life imitating art, or perhaps the reverse. Let's just say I'm drawing on personal experience, Maeve replied carefully. Speaking of which, Nate mentioned something interesting about his former consultant. As Maeve shared what she knew about Vanessa's possible corporate espionage, a plan began forming in her mind, a plan that would bring the truth to light without lowering herself to the moral depths of those who had betrayed her. While Maeve recovered and wrote, Nate confronted the evidence Emily Winters had helped unearth. The patterns were undeniable. Vanessa had systematically extracted information from Prescott Investments, often during their most intimate moments, and passed it to Elliot Chambers at Westridge Capital. Email timestamps showed messages sent to Elliot minutes after leaving Nate's bed. Meeting notes contained subtle probes for information about upcoming deals. The full picture was devastating. A calculated campaign of seduction and betrayal designed to undermine Prescott Investments while boosting Westridge's position. Nate arranged to meet Elliot at a members-only club in the financial district, a neutral location where two business rivals could speak privately without raising eyebrows. Elliot arrived with the confidence of a man who believed he held all the cards. At 45, he was fit and polished, his expensive suit and manicured hands projecting calculated success. Nathaniel, he greeted, ordering a scotch from a passing server. I must say I was surprised by your invitation. I'll bet you were, Nate replied coolly. How's Vanessa? Elliot's smile never faltered. I wouldn't know. Our paths rarely cross these days. That's interesting, considering she's carrying your child. A brief flash of irritation crossed Elliot's face. "Ah, so that's what this is about. Look, Nate, what happened between you and Vanessa is unfortunate, but hardly my concern." Nate slid a folder across the table. "Open it." Inside were printouts of emails, metadata analyses, and financial transfers, a damning trail connecting Vanessa, Elliot, and the information theft from Prescott Investments. "You know, the SEC takes a very dim view of insider trading," Nate said conversationally as Elliot's face drained of color, "particularly when it involves corporate espionage." "This proves nothing," Elliot insisted, though his shaking hands betrayed him as he shoved the folder away. "It's enough for an investigation. Once the SEC starts digging, who knows what they'll find. Vanessa doesn't strike me as the type to fall on her sword to protect you." Elliot's facade cracked. "What do you want, Prescott?" "I want you to understand something." Nate leaned forward. "You didn't just steal corporate information. You were part of something that hurt innocent people. My wife, my employees, their families." "Business is business," Elliot said defensively. "Nothing personal." "It became personal the moment Vanessa entered my marriage," Nate replied. "Now you have a choice. Resign from Westridge, return the profits from every tainted trade, and disappear from the financial industry. Or I take this to the SEC, the FBI, and every financial journalist in the country." "You're bluffing." "This would damage Prescott Investments too. Your reputation—" "My reputation," Nate laughed bitterly. "My reputation is already in shambles. But unlike you, I still have my integrity. Think about it, Elliot. Think about it carefully." As Nate walked away, leaving Elliot staring at the damning evidence, he felt no triumph, only a grim satisfaction that justice was finally in motion. What he didn't know was that Maeve had already set her own wheels turning, a parallel path to justice that would complement his actions in ways he couldn't yet imagine. That night, while Nate briefed Marcus Delaney on his confrontation with Elliot, Maeve sat at her writing desk, finishing a chapter of her novel. In it, her protagonist discovered not only her husband's betrayal, but the larger web of deception that had ensnared them all. Unlike Maeve's real life, however, the fictional woman didn't sit passively by. Instead, she methodically gathered evidence, built alliances, and prepared for the moment when truth would become her most powerful weapon. As Maeve typed the final sentence of the chapter, she paused to check her email. A message from her agent confirmed what she had hoped. A major literary magazine wanted to publish an excerpt of her novel in progress. The excerpt she had chosen detailed the corporate espionage plot, thinly disguised but recognizable to anyone familiar with San Francisco's financial world. "Fiction, of course," she murmured to herself as she accepted the offer. "Any resemblance to persons living or dead is purely coincidental." But as she closed her laptop, the smile that played across her lips suggested that coincidence had very little to do with it. The boardroom of Prescott Investments had witnessed countless victories over the years. Deals closed, acquisitions celebrated, strategies that propelled the firm from upstart to powerhouse. Today, it was the scene of a potential execution. Nate sat alone at the head of the mahogany table, reviewing his notes one final time as he waited for the board members to arrive. The evidence against Vanessa and Elliot was compelling, but incomplete. More troubling were the questions it raised about internal controls and his own judgment. Board members filed in silently, 8 men and women whose combined financial expertise had guided companies through recessions, market crashes, and technological revolutions. Their expressions ranged from concern to barely concealed anger. Albert Chen, the 72-year-old chairman, spoke first. "Nathaniel, we've reviewed the preliminary findings of the internal investigation. Before we discuss next steps, we'd like to hear directly from you about how this breach occurred." Nate met the chairman's gaze unflinchingly. "I allowed a trusted consultant unprecedented access to sensitive information without proper oversight. I failed to recognize signs of corporate espionage because I was personally involved with Vanessa Reed. These are serious lapses in judgment that ultimately trace back to me." "That's putting it mildly," said Regina Winters, former Federal Reserve economist and the board's most outspoken member. "Your affair with Reed has potentially exposed this firm to regulatory action, shareholder lawsuits, and reputational damage that could take years to repair." "I understand that," Nate acknowledged. "I'm not here to defend my actions or minimize the harm. I'm here to outline our response strategy." "Some board members have suggested that strategy should begin with your permanent resignation," Albert stated bluntly. The words hung in the air, their weight palpable. 6 months ago, such a suggestion would have been unthinkable. Nate Prescott was Prescott Investments. His vision, his relationships, his reputation for integrity. That is your prerogative, Nate replied steadily. But before you decide, you should know that I've initiated contact with the SEC to self-report the potential insider trading issues. I've provided them with evidence that places responsibility squarely on Vanessa Reed and Elliot Chambers, not the firm itself. A ripple of surprise passed through the room. You went to the SEC without board approval, Regina demanded. I went as Nathaniel Prescott, individual, not as CEO of Prescott Investments. The distinction matters legally. Albert leaned forward. And what exactly did you tell them? The truth that I discovered evidence of information theft by a consultant who was passing data to a competitor, that I personally confronted that competitor, and that I am cooperating fully with any investigation. Nate distributed documents to each board member. This is my proposed recovery plan. It includes a temporary leadership transition, enhanced security protocols, client retention strategies, and a public relations approach that frames this as an attack we discovered and addressed proactively. The board members reviewed the materials with professional detachment. Finally, Albert spoke. We'll need to discuss this privately, Nathaniel. Please wait outside. In the hallway, Nate stared out the window at the San Francisco skyline. The company he had built from nothing might be taken from him today. Strangely, the prospect didn't devastate him as it once would have. Since Maeve's hospitalization, his priorities had shifted. The foundation work had connected him with families whose entire worlds had been upended by cancer, making his corporate concerns seem simultaneously crucial and trivial. After 40 minutes, Jessica appeared. They're ready for you, Mr. Prescott. Albert didn't waste time on preliminaries. The board has decided to accept your proposal with modifications. Marcus Delaney will continue as interim CEO for 6 months. You will remain as chairman, but relinquish operational control. After 6 months, we'll reassess based on the status of any SEC investigations and the company's stability. It was better than Nate had expected. Thank you for your confidence. Don't mistake this for confidence, Regina cut in. This is pragmatism. Your departure now would create more problems than it solves, but make no mistake, you're on probation, Nathaniel. As the meeting concluded, Albert held Nate back. Off the record, what prompted you to investigate Reed in the first place? Some suspicion about the trades? No, Nate admitted. It was personal. After I learned the baby wasn't mine, something didn't add up about the timing of our relationship. I started pulling on that thread, and the whole tapestry unraveled. Albert nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes our personal and professional lives intersect in unexpected ways. I'm sorry about your marriage, by the way. Maeve is an exceptional woman. Yes, Nate agreed quietly. She is. Across town, in the oncology wing of UCSF Medical Center, Maeve sat in a treatment chair for the last time. The familiar clear fluid dripped from an IV bag into her port, delivering the final dose of the chemotherapy regimen that had dominated her life for nearly a year. Last one, Dr. Chen said with a smile, checking Maeve's vital signs. Your latest scans look excellent. The tumor has completely resolved, and your blood work is trending toward normal. So I'm cured? Maeve asked, the word feeling strange in her mouth after so many months of uncertainty. We don't use that term until you've been cancer-free for 5 years, Dr. Chen explained. But you're in complete remission, which is our goal. You'll have follow-up scans every 3 months for the first year, then less frequently if all remains clear. Beside her, James Sullivan squeezed her hand. He had taken to accompanying her to treatments after Maeve's sepsis scare, his steady presence a comfort during the long hours in the chair. We should celebrate, he suggested, as Dr. Chen moved on to the next patient. Dinner at Aquarello. I know the chef. He'll make something special even if you're not feeling up to a full meal. Maeve hesitated. That's incredibly kind, but I think I need a quiet night at home. The last treatment always hits me hardest. Of course, James nodded, disappointment flashing briefly across his face. Another time then. As the medication continued its slow drip, Maeve opened her laptop to review the latest email from her publisher. The advance copies of her novel excerpt were generating significant buzz in literary circles, with several reviewers noting the ripped from the headlines quality of the corporate espionage subplot. No one had made direct connections to Prescott Investments or Westridge Capital yet, but it seemed only a matter of time. James peered at the screen. Good news? Very. The excerpt is being well received, Maeve replied. And my editor thinks the full manuscript will be ready for publication ahead of schedule. I'm not surprised. What I've read is extraordinary, the way you balance personal betrayal with the larger themes of corporate ethics and recovery. He paused. Though I have to admit I'm curious about how autobiographical it really is. Maeve closed her laptop, smiling enigmatically. As I always tell my students, all fiction contains elements of truth, but not all truth belongs in fiction. James studied her face. Maeve, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. These past months, spending time with you, supporting you through treatment, it's meant more to me than I expected. I've developed feelings for you that go beyond friendship. The confession hung between them, sincere yet complicated by timing and circumstance. James, Maeve began gently, I care about you deeply. Your support has been invaluable, but I'm still finding my way through the aftermath of my marriage. I'm not ready for anything more than friendship right now. I understand, he said quickly, and I respect that. I just wanted you to know where I stand, whenever, if ever, you're ready. Maeve touched his arm. Thank you for your honesty, and for not making me feel pressured to respond in kind. As they lapsed into a comfortable silence, Maeve found herself reflecting on the unexpected paths her life had taken. A year ago, she had been a happily married academic with a comfortable routine and predictable future. Now she was a soon-to-be-published novelist, a cancer survivor, and a woman rediscovering her independence. The journey had been brutal, but she couldn't deny the strange gifts it had brought: clarity, purpose, and a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. The Pacific Cancer Foundation Gala transformed the San Francisco Opera House into a glittering showcase of the city's wealth and philanthropy. As a founding donor of the organization, Nate circulated among guests, his practiced charm channeled toward fundraising rather than deal-making. Mr. Prescott, called an elegantly dressed woman in her 60s, my husband and I were just discussing your foundation's caregiver support program. It's such an overlooked need. Nate engaged her warmly, explaining how witnessing his ex-wife's cancer journey had illuminated the strain on not just patients, but their entire support networks. As he described the foundation's work, something in his peripheral vision caught his attention, a familiar silhouette entering the grand foyer. Maeve stood just inside the entrance, stunning in a deep emerald gown that complemented her now pixie-length hair. Beside her, James Sullivan looked distinguished in a classic tuxedo, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. "Excuse me," Nate murmured to the donor, making his way across the room before conscious thought caught up with impulse. "Maeve," he said when he reached her, "I didn't know you were attending." She turned, surprise flickering across her face. "Nate, the department purchased a table to support Dr. Chen's research. She invited us personally." "You look incredible," he said honestly. The gauntness of treatment had given way to a healthy glow, and the short hair framed her face beautifully. "Thank you. It's amazing what completing chemotherapy can do for one's appearance." Her attempt at humor couldn't quite mask the awkwardness between them. James extended his hand. "Good to see you again, Nathaniel." "Impressive event." Nate shook it, noting the protective stance James had assumed beside Maeve. "Thank you." "I can't take credit. The foundation staff did all the work." He turned back to Maeve. "How are you feeling? I heard this was your last treatment week." "Tired, but good. Dr. Chen is pleased with my response." "That's wonderful news," Nate said, meaning it more deeply than words could express. An announcement requested that guests take their seats for dinner. James touched Maeve's elbow. "We should find our table." "Of course," she nodded. "It was good to see you, Nate." As they moved away, Nate felt the familiar ache of loss, sharper now for having seen her so vibrant, so beautiful, and so clearly establishing a life that no longer included him. His genuine happiness for her recovery mingled with the painful recognition that his remorse, his foundation work, his attempts at redemption, none of it would be enough to win her back. He had irreparably shattered what they had built together, and now she was building something new from the fragments. The most loving thing he could do was to step aside and let her. Vanessa Reed's text message arrived at midnight. "We need to talk. Important. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., Ferry Building." Nate stared at his phone, weighing whether to respond. After the confrontation with Elliot and the SEC self-reporting, he had expected Vanessa to disappear or lawyer up. A direct meeting request was the last thing he anticipated. "What about?" he finally replied. "Information that could save your company." Come alone." The next morning, Nate arrived at the ferry building early, selecting a public bench with clear sightlines in all directions. He wasn't sure what game Vanessa was playing, but he wouldn't be caught unprepared again. She appeared precisely at 9, her pregnancy now visibly showing beneath a tailored maternity dress. Despite everything, she still projected the polished confidence that had initially impressed him. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting beside him without waiting for an invitation. "You said you have information," Nate replied coldly. "I'm listening. First, I want you to know that I never intended things to go this far. The relationship between us, that wasn't part of the original plan." "Spare me the revisionist history," Nate cut her off. "You used me to get information for Elliot. It was calculated from the beginning." "Not entirely," she insisted. "Elliot approached me after I'd already been consulting for Prescott for months. He found out about our connection and pressured me to leverage it. And you agreed. I made a mistake." Her hand rested protectively on her stomach. "I have to think about my future now, my child's future." "What do you want, Vanessa?" "Immunity," she said directly. "I'll provide complete documentation of Elliot's insider trading operation, not just involving Prescott, but 6 other firms. Records going back 3 years. Evidence that he coerced me and others into cooperating. In exchange, you helped me make a deal with the SEC. Nate studied her face, looking for the manipulation behind the offer. "Why would you turn on Elliot now?" "He's your child's father." "Because he's cutting me loose," Vanessa admitted, a flash of genuine hurt crossing her features. "Once the initial investigation started, he claimed I acted alone. He's positioning himself as another victim of my corporate seduction tactics." Despite everything she had done, Nate felt a flicker of sympathy. Vanessa had been ruthless and calculating, but Elliot was proving himself the greater predator. "If your information is as valuable as you claim, I'll speak to our attorneys about approaching the SEC, Nate said carefully. "But no promises." "That's all I'm asking," Vanessa replied, relief evident in her voice. "There's one more thing you should know. Elliot has someone else inside Prescott, someone on your executive team. That's how he knew exactly when to approach me." The revelation hit Nate like a physical blow. "Who?" "I don't know names, just that they communicate through an encrypted messaging app. But their access goes deeper than mine ever did." As Vanessa walked away, leaving Nate to process this new betrayal, he realized the company he had built was compromised at levels he hadn't imagined. Someone he trusted, someone in his inner circle, had been working against him all along. The impossible situation he faced now had multiple fronts: identifying the traitor within Prescott, navigating the SEC investigation, managing the board's tenuous confidence, and preventing the collapse of 2 decades of work, all while accepting that the most important thing he had ever built, his marriage to Maeve, was irretrievably lost. In her apartment, Maeve reviewed the notes Sybil had gathered through her forensic specialist friend. The evidence against Vanessa was substantial, but the hints of a second insider at Prescott Investments were particularly intriguing. "Are you sure you want to keep digging into this?" Sybil asked, pouring them both tea. "You're finally cancer-free. Maybe it's time to focus on healing and moving forward." "This is part of my healing," Maeve explained. "Not revenge, clarity. Understanding the full scope of what happened lets me process it completely." And the novel excerpt, publishing that thinly veiled account of corporate espionage while the real investigation is ongoing. That's not a shot across the bow. Maeve smiled slightly. "It's truth wrapped in fiction. Besides, I'm not naming names." "Not explicitly," Sybil conceded. "But anyone in San Francisco finance will connect the dots. That's their prerogative." Maeve sipped her tea. "The interesting thing about fiction is that it often exposes deeper truths than direct accusation. People resist being told what happened, but they engage with a story that lets them discover it themselves." Sybil studied her friend with newfound respect. "You've changed, Maeve, not just physically. Cancer has a way of burning away the non-essential," Maeve agreed. "I spent 20 years as the supportive wife, the dedicated professor, defining myself by my relationships to others. Now I'm writing my own story, literally and figuratively." As she spoke, Maeve opened her laptop to review emails from readers who had connected with her published excerpt. Among the literary praise were messages from women who had experienced similar betrayals, who found strength in her protagonist's resilience, who saw their own struggles reflected in her words. "This is the unexpected gift," she told Sybil, gesturing to the messages. "By writing about my pain, I've created something that helps others through theirs. It doesn't erase what happened, but it gives it meaning beyond personal tragedy." The realization had come to her gradually during recovery, that her greatest strength wasn't in confronting Vanessa directly or punishing Nate, but in transforming her experience into art that spoke truth to others. The novel was both her shield and her sword, protecting her heart while fighting battles larger than her personal grievances. As Sybil departed, promising to continue their investigation discreetly, Maeve returned to her writing. On her screen, her protagonist was discovering the identity of the second insider at the fictional company, a revelation that would come in the novel's climax, bringing all the betrayals into the light at once. Maeve smiled as her fingers flew across the keyboard. In fiction, as in life, timing was everything. "Mr. Prescott, the SEC enforcement team is here." Nate looked up from his desk to see Jessica standing tensely in the doorway. Though still officially on leave from day-to-day operations, he had returned to headquarters for this meeting, one that could determine Prescott Investments' future. "Show them to the main conference room," he instructed, "and let Marcus know they've arrived." As Jessica departed, Nate gathered the files his legal team had prepared. The past 3 weeks had been a maelstrom of activity following his meeting with Vanessa. Internal investigations had narrowed the list of potential insider collaborators, but produced no definitive proof. Meanwhile, the SEC had intensified its inquiry, requesting thousands of documents and interviewing dozens of employees. What troubled Nate most wasn't the investigation itself, but its unexpected acceleration. Someone had provided the SEC with evidence that went beyond what he had self-reported, detailed documentation that pinpointed specific trades, communications, and money transfers. The evidence was comprehensive enough that the SEC had upgraded its informal inquiry to a formal investigation almost overnight. In the conference room, 4 SEC officials waited with Marcus and the company's outside counsel. The lead investigator, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair and no-nonsense glasses, introduced herself as Diane Hargrove. "Mr. Prescott, we appreciate your continued cooperation," she began. "Today, we're particularly interested in discussing new evidence that has come to our attention regarding the relationship between Prescott Investments, Vanessa Reed, and Westridge Capital." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts of emails, financial records, and text message logs, many of which Nate had never seen before. "These documents were submitted to our whistleblower program anonymously," Hargrove explained. "They corroborate much of what you've already provided, but include additional communications, suggesting that Ms. Reed's activities were part of a coordinated effort orchestrated by Elliot Chambers." Nate flipped through the pages, recognizing some from his own investigation, but finding others completely new. "May I ask when you received these?" 2 weeks ago, shortly after you came forward. The timing suggests someone else was conducting a parallel investigation. Hargrove's gaze was penetrating. "Would you have any idea who that might be?" Nate's mind raced. The evidence was meticulously organized, annotated with timestamps and context that made its implications unmistakable. Only someone deeply familiar with both financial markets and investigative techniques could have assembled such a compelling case. "I couldn't say," he replied carefully. The meeting continued for 3 hours as the SEC team methodically reviewed the evidence, and Nate's legal team negotiated the terms of continued cooperation. By the end, one thing was clear. While Prescott Investments would face fines and enhanced oversight, the focus of criminal investigation had shifted decisively to Vanessa Reed and Elliot Chambers. As the SEC officials departed, Marcus pulled Nate aside. "Someone is helping us. That evidence didn't materialize out of thin air." "I know," Nate agreed, "and I think I might know who." The exclusive Ocean Beach Club perched on San Francisco's western edge, offering members spectacular sunset views and privacy from the city's prying eyes. In a corner booth of its hushed dining room, Maeve sat across from her literary agent, Catherine Wong, reviewing early press for her novel. The New Yorker is calling it a searing examination of betrayal in both the bedroom and the boardroom, Catherine read from her tablet. The Wall Street Journal's reviewer described the corporate espionage plot as disturbingly plausible and wondered aloud if it was based on real events. "Let them wonder," Maeve replied, sipping her sparkling water. "That's half the fun of fiction." The publisher wants to move up the release date to capitalize on the buzz from your excerpt. They're talking major promotional push, book tour, interviews, the works. Maeve's phone vibrated with a news alert. She glanced down and froze. "What is it?" Catherine asked, noticing her sudden stillness. "Excuse me a moment," Maeve said, stepping away from the table to read the breaking news headline. SEC charges Westridge CFO Elliot Chambers with insider trading. Former consultant Vanessa Reed named co-conspirator. The article detailed how the SEC had filed formal charges against Chambers and issued an arrest warrant for Reed, who was believed to be attempting to flee the country. Sources close to the investigation claimed evidence had been provided by both Prescott Investments and an anonymous whistleblower. As Maeve processed this development, her phone rang. "Sybil, have you seen the news?" Sybil asked without preamble. "Just now. It's happening faster than I expected." "That's not all," Sybil continued. "My contact at UCSF says Vanessa Reed checked into the emergency department an hour ago with pregnancy complications. She's being monitored overnight." Maeve's grip tightened on her phone. "Which hospital?" "Maeve, don't even think about it," Sybil warned. "Whatever you're planning." "I'm not planning anything," Maeve interrupted. "I just want to know." After a pause, Sybil sighed. "UCSF, but security is tight. The FBI has people watching her room. They're worried she might try to run." "Thank you," Maeve said, ending the call before Sybil could object further. Returning to Catherine, she offered an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, but something's come up. Can we continue this tomorrow?" 30 minutes later, Maeve walked through the sliding doors of UCSF Medical Center, a building she knew all too well from her months of treatment. With the confidence of someone who belonged there, she navigated past the main reception area toward the maternity wing. Near the nurses' station, she spotted two men in suits who were clearly federal agents. Using her knowledge of the hospital's layout, she took a service corridor that circumvented their position, emerging near the private rooms reserved for high-risk pregnancies. Room 412 had no nameplate, but the uniformed police officer stationed outside confirmed Maeve's suspicions. Approaching from the adjacent hallway, she waited until the officer stepped away to speak with a nurse, then slipped into the room. Vanessa Reed lay in the hospital bed, an IV in her arm and fetal monitors strapped to her rounded abdomen. Her face, usually perfect in its cosmetic precision, was drawn and pale. She looked up in shock as Maeve closed the door behind her. "You," Vanessa whispered, recognition and fear flashing across her features. "Hello, Vanessa," Maeve said calmly, taking the visitor's chair beside the bed. "I thought it was time we finally met properly." Vanessa's hand moved toward the call button, but Maeve gently placed her own hand over it. "I'm not here to hurt you," Maeve assured her. "I just want to talk. Woman to woman before the FBI takes you away." "How did you get past security?" Vanessa asked, her voice hoarse. "I spent nearly a year in this hospital fighting cancer. I know every corridor, every shift change. The staff still recognizes me." Maeve studied the younger woman, the woman who had nearly destroyed her life. "How's the baby?" Vanessa's hand moved protectively to her stomach. "Stable for now, the stress—" She left the sentence unfinished. "I understand stress," Maeve said. "I was undergoing chemotherapy when I learned my husband was sleeping with you." Vanessa had the decency to look away. "I never meant for it to go so far. Elliot pressured me to get information from Nate, but the affair, that wasn't originally part of the plan." "But you let it happen," Maeve observed. "You saw a man whose wife was fighting cancer and decided he was fair game." "It wasn't like that," Vanessa protested weakly. "Nate was lonely, desperate for connection. He talked about you all the time, how helpless he felt watching you suffer. I just listened, while extracting information that you passed to Elliot." "Yes." Vanessa met Maeve's eyes finally. "I'm not going to pretend I was innocent in all this, but Elliot had leverage over me from previous work we'd done. Things that could end my career." "And now?" Maeve asked. "Now I'm facing federal charges, pregnant with the child of a man who's throwing me to the wolves to save himself." Vanessa's composure cracked. "They'll make an example of me, the honeypot corporate spy who seduced her way into insider information." Maeve was silent for a moment, allowing herself to really see the woman before her, not just the homewrecker, the spy, the villain of her personal narrative, but a complicated human being who had made terrible choices and now faced devastating consequences. "It was you, wasn't it?" Vanessa asked suddenly. "The anonymous whistleblower. You've been gathering evidence all along. What makes you think that? Maeve's expression remained neutral. The evidence the SEC has, it's too comprehensive to come just from Nate. And the timing right after your novel excerpt was published. Vanessa's eyes widened with realization. You played us all. The quiet literature professor was the most dangerous person in the room. Before Maeve could respond, the door opened. A nurse entered, followed by Nate, whose face registered shock at finding his ex-wife seated beside his former mistress. Maeve, what are you doing here? Just having a conversation, Maeve replied, standing. I think we're finished now. As she moved toward the door, Vanessa called after her. Was it worth it? Using your novel to expose everything while staying safely behind the shield of fiction? Maeve paused. My novel is a work of fiction inspired by personal experience. Any resemblance to actual persons is, as they say, purely coincidental. Her smile held no warmth. But to answer your question, yes, it was worth it. Truth has a way of finding the light, whether through legal documents or literature. In the hallway, Nate caught up with her. Maeve, wait. We need to talk. Not here, she said, aware of the federal agents who had noticed the commotion and were approaching. They found privacy in a small waiting area at the end of the corridor. Through the window, the lights of San Francisco twinkled against the night sky, the same city where they had built and lost their life together. It was you, Nate said without preamble. You provided the evidence to the SEC. You've been investigating Vanessa and Elliot all along. Maeve neither confirmed nor denied it. What makes you think that? The evidence was too perfect. Financial records annotated with literary precision, communications organized chronologically, with context that only someone with a storyteller's eye would include. His expression was a mixture of awe and disbelief. While I was fumbling with internal investigations and legal teams, you were building an airtight case. If that were true, Maeve said carefully, it would be because I had help. Sybil knows people with specific skills. And a literature professor understands how to construct a compelling narrative from disparate facts. And the novel? Was that part of the plan too? The novel was therapy at first, then it became something more, a way to process what happened, to reclaim my story. Maeve looked out the window. The fact that publishing an excerpt forced Vanessa and Elliot to make desperate moves was a fortunate side effect. Nate shook his head in amazement. You orchestrated the perfect revenge without ever getting your hands dirty. No personal confrontations, no public accusations, just the systematic exposure of truth through both legal channels and literary metaphor. It wasn't about revenge, Maeve corrected him. It was about justice. Not just for me, but for your company, your employees, your investors, everyone harmed by their actions. Why? Nate asked. After what I did to you, why would you help protect Prescott Investments? Maeve turned to face him fully. Because 20 years of marriage doesn't disappear overnight, even after betrayal. Because despite everything, I didn't want to see your life's work destroyed by the same people who tried to destroy our marriage. And because, she hesitated, because I needed to close this chapter on my own terms. The honesty between them felt raw and new, a different quality of truth than they had shared even in their best years together. What happens now? Nate asked quietly. Now the legal system deals with Vanessa and Elliot. My novel will be published next month. Your company will recover under Marcus's leadership, and we'll both move forward with our lives, separately but perhaps not as enemies. I never wanted to be your enemy, Nate said, his voice thick with emotion. I know, but you made choices that made it impossible for us to be partners anymore. Maeve's expression softened slightly. The foundation work you're doing, it matters, Nate. Keep doing it. As they stood together in that quiet moment, the sound of commotion drew their attention back to the hallway. Federal agents were leading a handcuffed Elliot Chambers past them, his face ashen with shock. Behind them, a nurse was urgently speaking with medical staff outside Vanessa's room. What's happening? Nate asked a passing hospital security guard. The pregnant patient tried to escape through the bathroom window, the guard explained. She fell and went into premature labor. They're preparing for an emergency C-section. The news struck both Nate and Maeve with unexpected force, a reminder that beyond the corporate intrigue and personal betrayal, real lives hung in the balance. I should go, Maeve said, suddenly weary. This isn't our drama anymore. As she walked away, Nate called after her. Maeve, thank you for everything you did. Your way was better than mine would have been. She turned back one last time. That's the thing about storytelling, Nate. The author always has control over the ending. The next morning, newspapers and financial news sites blared headlines about the Prescott-Westridge scandal. The SEC had filed additional charges against Elliot Chambers, including evidence of similar schemes targeting other firms. Vanessa Reed had delivered a premature but healthy baby boy before being formally charged, and most surprisingly, a second Westridge executive, Chambers' chief of staff, had been arrested for orchestrating the placement of corporate spies in competing firms. The scandal dominated financial news for weeks, but slowly gave way to other stories. Prescott Investments, having cooperated fully with authorities, emerged with enhanced compliance systems and a renewed commitment to ethical practices under Marcus Delaney's leadership. Nate's role as chairman became increasingly ceremonial as he dedicated more time to foundation work. When Maeve's novel Breached Trust was published, the literary world embraced it as both a personal story of recovery and a scathing indictment of corporate greed. Reviewers noted the uncanny similarities to the Prescott-Westridge case, generating a buzz that propelled the book onto bestseller lists. At a small bookstore in Berkeley, Maeve gave her first public reading to a packed audience. As she read passages detailing her protagonist's discovery of betrayal and subsequent journey toward justice, she noticed a familiar figure standing at the back of the room. Nate remained through the entire reading, but slipped out during the applause, leaving behind a single white card on the signing table. Hours later, after the crowds had dispersed, Maeve finally read his message. "You gave her a better ending than I gave us. Your talent was always seeing the humanity in broken people. I'm sorry I didn't appreciate that, or you, until it was too late. With admiration and regret, N." Maeve tucked the card into her novel's final page, where her protagonist found not perfect happiness, but something perhaps more valuable: the peace that comes from writing one's own story, even after others tried to wrest away the pen. 6 months after the arrests of Elliot Chambers and Vanessa Reed, the federal courthouse in downtown San Francisco became the stage for a drama as compelling as any fiction. The United States versus Chambers and Reed trial drew spectators from the financial and literary worlds alike, with journalists scrambling for limited seats in the gallery. Maeve entered the imposing marble building on the third day of proceedings, her publicist and Sybil flanking her protectively. Despite her rising literary fame, or perhaps because of it, her scheduled testimony had generated intense speculation. "Remember, you only need to answer what they ask," her attorney advised as they waited outside the courtroom. "Don't volunteer information." Maeve nodded, her expression calm despite the gravity of the moment. Her testimony would focus narrowly on how she discovered financial discrepancies while organizing Nate's home office during her illness, a carefully constructed narrative that protected her more active role in gathering evidence. Inside, the courtroom fell silent as she was sworn in. From the witness box, she could see Vanessa at the defense table, noticeably thinner after giving birth, her designer clothing replaced by a conservative navy suit. Elliot sat nearby, his once commanding presence diminished by months of legal proceedings. "Mrs. Prescott," began the federal prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman with precise diction, "could you describe for the court what you discovered in September of last year while organizing financial documents in your home?" Maeve's voice remained steady as she recounted finding suspicious emails printed among Nate's papers, communications that, to her literature professor's eye, contained coded language about trading activities. How her initial concern about her husband's potential wrongdoing had transformed into suspicion about his consultant. How subsequent discoveries led her to connect Vanessa Reed's frequent visits to the house with missing files and accessed accounts. "And what did you do with this information?" the prosecutor asked. "I collected what I found and provided it to the SEC through their whistleblower program," Maeve answered, the careful truth that omitted Sybil's help, the forensic specialist, and months of calculated investigation. The defense attorney's cross-examination attempted to paint her as a vengeful wife, manufacturing evidence to punish her husband's mistress. Each question came loaded with insinuation, seeking to undermine her credibility through her personal pain. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Prescott, that you had powerful motivation to damage Ms. Reed's reputation after learning of her relationship with your husband?" Maeve met the attorney's gaze directly. "I had no interest in Ms. Reed's reputation. My concern was the apparent theft of confidential information from my husband's company, a company that supports hundreds of employees and their families. And your novel breached trust with its striking similarities to these events. Was that also motivated by civic duty rather than personal vendetta? My novel is a work of fiction informed by personal experience, Maeve replied evenly. As a literature professor, I teach my students that art often serves as a means of processing trauma. Writing was my therapy during cancer treatment and its aftermath. A therapy that has now earned you a place on the bestseller list and a national book tour, the attorney noted sarcastically. Success was never the goal, Maeve said. Healing was. Something in her dignified response silenced the courtroom. Even the defense attorney paused, seemingly recognizing the futility of attacking a cancer survivor who had transformed betrayal into art rather than bitterness. When finally excused, Maeve passed the defense table on her way out. Vanessa's eyes followed her, not with hatred as might be expected, but with a complex mixture of resentment and reluctant respect. Their gazes held for a moment, two women whose lives had become inextricably intertwined through the actions of men and their own responding choices. Outside, reporters shouted questions that Maeve's publicist deflected as they moved toward a waiting car. Only when safely inside did Maeve release the breath she'd been holding, her composed facade cracking slightly. "You were magnificent," Sybil said, squeezing her hand. "I feel hollow," Maeve admitted, "like I've performed a necessary but draining ritual." "It's over now," her publicist assured her. "Your part, at least. The Chicago leg of your book tour starts tomorrow. You can put this behind you." But as the car pulled away from the courthouse, Maeve wondered if such clean separations were ever truly possible. The trial, her testimony, the public nature of private pain, all felt like necessary steps in a journey she hadn't chosen but was determined to complete with dignity. While Maeve's testimony made headlines, Nate watched the trial coverage from the newly redesigned offices of Prescott Investments. The company had emerged from the scandal diminished but intact, its reputation slowly rebuilding under a comprehensive ethics overhaul that Nate had personally championed. The 42nd floor now featured a glass-walled ethics and compliance department positioned prominently near the executive suites, a physical reminder of the company's new priorities. Marcus Delaney had proven an effective CEO, implementing structural changes that made the kind of breach Vanessa had orchestrated nearly impossible. "The board approved the transparency initiative," Jessica informed him, placing a folder on his desk. "Quarterly ethics reports will be published alongside financial statements starting next quarter." "Good," Nate nodded. "And the foundation grant proposals?" "Reviewed and ranked as you requested. The cancer caregiver support programs were particularly strong this cycle." As she left, Nate turned to the window, the same view that had once represented conquest now symbolizing something more complex: responsibility, consequence, and the possibility of redemption through meaningful work rather than accumulation. His phone buzzed with a text from Albert Chen. Saw Maeve's testimony. Remarkably dignified. "You built a good company. She built a good life. Remember that." The simple message hit with unexpected force. For months, Nate had channeled his regret into reforming his company and expanding the foundation, telling himself these tangible actions might eventually balance the moral ledger. But watching Maeve's composed testimony, her quiet strength in the face of insinuation and attack, had reinforced what he'd been avoiding. No amount of corporate ethics reforms or charitable endeavors could repair what he had broken between them. That evening he found himself at a bookstore in the Marina district, standing before a display of breached trust. He had read it alone in his apartment the day it was published, recognizing immediately the artistry with which Maeve had transformed their story. Though names and specific circumstances were changed, the emotional truth resonated on every page. The protagonist's discovery of betrayal during illness, her methodical gathering of evidence against corporate conspirators, her reclamation of agency through creative work. Most striking was the novel's portrayal of the husband character, not as a villain, but as a deeply flawed man whose moral compromise during crisis revealed character weaknesses he had hidden even from himself. It was a more compassionate rendering than Nate believed he deserved. He purchased a copy, though he already owned one, and asked the clerk for a signing event schedule. Learning that Maeve's book tour would bring her back to San Francisco in 3 weeks, he made a note of the date and location. not yet certain what he would do with the information, only that it represented a possible moment of closure neither of them had properly achieved. The Chicago Arts Club hosted Maeve's reading in an elegant wood-paneled room filled beyond capacity. Her reputation had grown with each city on the tour, breached trust, finding resonance not just as a personal narrative of betrayal and recovery, but as a sophisticated examination of corporate ethics and female agency. After reading selected passages, she opened the floor to questions. Most focused on her writing process or the novel's themes, but one audience member, a young woman in the back row, asked the question Maeve had been fielding in various forms throughout the tour. How much of your protagonist's journey reflects your own experience with betrayal? Did writing this story help you forgive? Maeve considered the question carefully before answering. Fiction allows us to process truth through a protective lens. My protagonist's journey certainly echoes aspects of my personal experience, but she is not me. She makes choices I might not make, finds strength in ways I might not find it. She paused, aware that her response hadn't addressed the heart of the question. As for forgiveness, that's complex. The novel doesn't end with a neat resolution where all is forgotten, and neither does real life. What my protagonist achieves, what I've sought myself, is not forgiveness as absolution, but understanding that leads to freedom from anger's grip. The answer seemed to satisfy the questioner, but as Maeve signed books afterward, she found herself reflecting on how her response had evolved over the months of touring. Early on, she had emphasized the justice elements of her story, the satisfaction of exposing wrongdoing, the vindication of truth revealed. Increasingly, however, she found herself drawn to the novel's subtler themes of personal transformation and the complicated nature of healing. That night in her hotel room, she received a text from James Sullivan. Missing you in San Francisco. Department feels empty without you. Thinking about your return next month. His messages had grown progressively more personal throughout her leave of absence. What had begun as collegial support during her illness had gradually evolved into something deeper, at least on his part. Maeve stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. James was everything she should want. Intelligent, kind, supportive through her darkest times. Yet something held her back from reciprocating his clearly growing feelings. Was it lingering attachment to Nate? Fear of vulnerability after betrayal, or simply that her own transformation remained incomplete, her identity still reforming after the seismic shifts of the past year? She finally texted back, "Miss the department too. Looking forward to being home. We should talk when I return." It was non-committal but honest. The conversation they needed couldn't happen through messages or calls. It required presence and clarity she hadn't yet fully achieved, despite outward appearances of having moved forward. 3 weeks later, Maeve returned to San Francisco for the final stops on her book tour. The city felt simultaneously familiar and strange, as if her months away had altered either the landscape or her perception of it. Driving from the airport along the Embarcadero, she found herself noting landmarks of her former life with Nate. Restaurants they had frequented, the office tower housing Prescott Investments, the path along the bay where they had walked on countless Sunday mornings. Her first evening back, James invited her to dinner at Aquarello, the upscale restaurant he had suggested after her final chemotherapy session months earlier. The significance wasn't lost on Maeve as she prepared in her apartment, choosing a simple emerald dress that complemented her now shoulder-length hair. James stood when she approached the table, his face lighting with genuine pleasure. "Welcome home," he said, taking her hands briefly. "You look wonderful." "Thank you," she smiled, settling across from him. "It's strange being back after living out of suitcases for months." "How was the tour? Your emails only gave highlights." "Exhausting but affirming," she admitted. "There's something powerful about connecting with readers who find resonance in your words." They fell into comfortable conversation about department politics, upcoming courses, and James's recent research publication. Only after their entrees arrived did he carefully steer toward more personal territory. "I've been thinking a lot about us while you were away," he began, his expression open and earnest, "about what might be possible between us." Maeve set down her fork. "James, let me finish," he requested gently. "I know timing is complicated. You've been through an extraordinary year. Cancer, divorce, becoming a best-selling author. I don't expect simple answers." His understanding only made what she needed to say more difficult. "You've been incredibly important to me," she began carefully. "Your support during treatment, after Nate's betrayal, I couldn't have managed without you. But, he prompted, already reading the direction of her words, but I'm still finding my way back to myself, she continued. The woman I was before cancer and betrayal is gone. The woman I'm becoming is still emerging. It wouldn't be fair to either of us for me to make commitments when I'm still in that process. James absorbed her words with the thoughtful patience that characterized him. I understand, he said finally. Truly I do, and I admire your self-awareness. He reached across the table to briefly touch her hand. Just know that my feelings haven't changed. I can wait for you to complete your journey. His generosity only deepened Maeve's certainty that she needed to be completely honest. That's the thing, James. I don't know where this journey leads, or if it will ever lead to the kind of relationship you deserve. You shouldn't wait for an uncertain outcome. A shadow of disappointment crossed his features, but was quickly replaced by acceptance. Then we continue as friends and colleagues who care deeply for each other, and leave the future unwritten. The remainder of dinner passed in lighter conversation, their honesty having cleared the air rather than poisoned it. As they parted outside the restaurant, James embraced her briefly. Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I'm in your corner, Maeve. That hasn't changed. She watched him walk away, feeling simultaneous relief at her honesty and uncertainty about closing a door on what might have been a safe harbor. But safety, she had learned, was not the same as wholeness. The final stop on Maeve's book tour was a literary salon hosted by City Lights Bookstore, the iconic San Francisco institution. The intimate setting allowed for deeper discussion than the larger venues had permitted, with readers and critics engaging her on the novel's exploration of ethical boundaries and psychological resilience. Your protagonist never seeks direct revenge, noted a literature professor from Berkeley. She instead creates circumstances where truth is inevitably revealed through others' actions. It's a fascinating moral position, ensuring justice without claiming the role of avenger. I'm interested in the spaces between conventional responses to betrayal, Maeve explained. Popular narratives often present limited options: forgive completely, seek vengeance, or remain a perpetual victim. I wanted to explore another possibility: reclaiming agency without surrendering moral authority. The discussion continued until the bookstore's closing time, with Maeve signing final copies before thanking the staff. As she gathered her things, a familiar figure emerged from the back of the now empty shop. Nate stood halfway down an aisle, a copy of her novel in his hands, uncertainty etched across his face. I didn't want to interrupt the event, he said, but I hoped we might talk, if you're willing. Maeve studied him, noting the new lines around his eyes, the slight graying at his temples that hadn't been there a year ago. There's a cafe still open around the corner, she suggested after a moment. They walked in silence through the cool San Francisco evening, the familiar fog rolling in from the bay. The cafe was nearly empty, allowing them a corner table away from the few remaining patrons. I read your book, Nate said once they were seated with steaming mugs. Twice, actually. And? Maeve asked, curious despite herself about his reaction. It's extraordinary, he said simply. Painful to read in places, but truthful in ways I wasn't prepared for. He hesitated. You were more generous to him, to me, than I deserved. I wasn't writing about you, she reminded him. Not exactly. Close enough to recognize myself in ways I've been avoiding. He traced the rim of his mug with one finger. The trial wrapped up yesterday. Both guilty on all counts. I saw the news. Vanessa made a deal for lighter sentencing. She's providing evidence against others in Elliot's network. Nate shook his head. The baby is with her sister in Seattle. Maeve absorbed this information, feeling a complicated mixture of satisfaction at justice served and sadness for the child born into such circumstances. And Prescott Investments. Marcus seems to be leading effectively. The company will survive. We've implemented every ethical reform imaginable. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. The board even suggested naming the new compliance department after you. Please tell me you declined. Of course. Though it would have been fitting, you're the one who ultimately saved the company. They fell silent, the weight of their shared history filling the space between them. Finally, Nate spoke the words he had clearly come to say. I've been working with a therapist, he told her, trying to understand why I made the choices I did, not to excuse them, but to ensure I never repeat them. That's good, Nate, she said sincerely. I realized something important, something your book helped clarify, he continued. My betrayal wasn't just the affair. It started earlier, when I emotionally abandoned you after your diagnosis. I couldn't face my fear of losing you, so I created distance that made the later betrayal possible. The insight surprised her, not the observation itself, which she had explored in her writing, but his recognition of it. Fear makes us do terrible things sometimes, she acknowledged. Not everyone, he countered. You faced cancer with courage I couldn't muster. You faced betrayal with dignity I couldn't imagine. And you found a way to ensure justice without becoming corrupted by vengeance. His voice thickened slightly. I keep wondering who I might have been if I'd had half your strength. Maeve felt the protective walls she had carefully maintained begin to soften. We all have different capacities for different challenges, she said. I'm not sure I would have navigated your path any better than you navigated mine. That's characteristic generosity, Nate said, a sad smile touching his lips. But we both know the truth. When tested, I failed. When tested far more severely, you transcended. To what end, though? Maeve asked, voicing a question that had increasingly troubled her. Justice was served, yes. My book has been successful beyond anything I imagined. But I still wake up some mornings feeling hollow inside, wondering if exposing the truth has actually healed anything, or just created a different kind of wound. The admission, one she hadn't shared with anyone, not even Sybil, hung between them. Nate considered it carefully before responding. Maybe healing isn't an end point but a direction, he suggested. Not a state of being but a process of becoming. The pain changes shape rather than disappearing entirely. The insight resonated with her own evolving understanding. That's surprisingly insightful for the man who once thought throwing money at cancer research would fix everything, she observed, a hint of their old comfortable banter returning briefly. I've had excellent teachers in suffering and consequence, he replied ruefully, though I would have preferred less intensive coursework. They shared a moment of genuine connection, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition of their mutual humanity. Outside, the fog had thickened, wrapping the cafe in a cocoon of grey that isolated them from the city beyond. What happens now? Nate asked, echoing the question he had posed months earlier in the hospital corridor. I don't know, Maeve answered honestly. I go back to teaching next semester, continue writing, try to find balance in this new version of my life. And us, he ventured cautiously. Is there any path forward? Not back to what we were, I know that's impossible, but to something new. Friends, perhaps, eventually. Maeve considered the question with the careful attention it deserved. I don't know that either, she admitted. There are days when I think I've moved beyond the hurt entirely, and days when it feels as fresh as when Sybil first told me about seeing you with Vanessa. She met his eyes directly. But I do know that I don't want to be defined by what happened to us, either the betrayal or my response to it. That seems fair, Nate nodded. For what it's worth, I'm proud of who you've become through all this. Not that my opinion matters. It matters, she interrupted gently. Not in the way it once did, but it matters. As they prepared to leave, Nate hesitated. Would it be all right if I called you sometime? Just to talk. No expectations, no pressure. Maeve considered his request, weighing the potential for renewed pain against the possibility of healing that might come from careful, bounded reconnection. I think I'd be open to that, she said finally. Not right away. I need to settle back into my life here first. Of course, he agreed quickly. Whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready. Outside the cafe, they paused before parting ways. The fog swirled around them, creating a moment that felt somehow suspended outside of normal time, a pocket universe where they were neither the couple they had been nor the strangers they had nearly become, but something in between. Take care of yourself, Nate, Maeve said softly. You too, Maeve, he replied. And thank you for talking with me tonight, for writing the book, for everything. They didn't embrace or even shake hands, the physical distance between them an appropriate reflection of their emotional reality. Instead, they simply nodded to each other before turning in opposite directions, each disappearing into the fog towards separate destinations. As Maeve walked toward her apartment, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, cancer had threatened her life while betrayal had shattered her heart. Now she moved through the world as a survivor twice over, her body healed, her spirit tempered by fire but not consumed by it. The novel she had written as therapy had become a lifeline for others navigating similar waters. The justice she had sought had been served without compromising her integrity, and the woman she had become, stronger, clearer, more authentically herself than before, was a person she was still discovering day by day. The fog began to thin as she neared home, revealing glimpses of stars above the city. Though uncertain what the future held, Maeve knew with sudden clarity that she was ready to face it, not as a victim seeking restoration of what was lost, nor as an avenger satisfied with retribution, but as a woman who had written her way through darkness to find her own light. 5 years later, the auditorium at Stanford University's medical school fell silent as Maeve Prescott approached the podium. At 50, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had found her voice and purpose. Her chestnut hair, fully regrown after chemotherapy and now elegantly streaked with silver, was swept into a simple updo that framed her face, a face that had appeared on the back covers of 3 best-selling novels and countless literary magazines. "Thank you for inviting me to speak at this important conference," she began, surveying the audience of medical professionals, psychologists, and cancer survivors. "When Dr. Eleanor Chen asked me to address narrative as healing patient stories in modern oncology, I was honored but also hesitant. I'm a novelist and professor, not a medical expert." She smiled slightly. "But as you've heard throughout this conference, healing is rarely confined to a single domain. The stories we tell about our illnesses, and the stories others tell about us, shape our recovery in ways just as profound as medical interventions." The keynote address that followed wove together her personal experience with cancer, her research on narrative therapy, and passages from her most recent work, a novel exploring how families rebuild after medical trauma. Unlike her debut, Breached Trust, which had become a cultural touchstone for discussions of corporate ethics and personal betrayal, her third book focused on recovery rather than revelation, healing rather than justice. As she concluded to warm applause, Maeve noticed a familiar figure sitting near the back of the hall. Nate had aged gracefully into his 50s, still handsome, but with a gentleness that had replaced his former corporate intensity. He hadn't mentioned attending when they'd spoken by phone the previous week, but his presence didn't surprise her. The Prescott Foundation for Cancer Support was a major sponsor of the conference. Their relationship had evolved over the 5 years since their conversation in the foggy cafe. Never returning to intimacy, they had instead developed a careful friendship built on monthly phone calls and occasional coffee meetings. The initial awkwardness had gradually given way to a new dynamic, not the comfortable closeness of their marriage, but something more measured, defined by mutual respect and shared history rather than romantic connection. After the reception, they found themselves alone in the medical school's courtyard, sitting on a stone bench beneath a flowering magnolia tree. "That was extraordinary, Maeve," Nate said. "Especially the part about how cancer patients reclaim narrative control through art therapy." "Thank you," she replied. "It's become the focus of my academic research these past few years, how creativity helps people process trauma." "It certainly worked for you," he observed. 3 novels, a full professorship, and now this foundation for writing workshops in cancer centers. The workshops have been the most rewarding," Maeve acknowledged. "Watching patients find their voices, even in the midst of treatment, it gives meaning to what happened to me." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching medical students hurry across the courtyard. Stanford held memories for both of them. The university where they had met as young graduate students, full of ambition and attraction, decades before cancer and betrayal had rewritten their story. "I heard Vanessa was released last month," Maeve said finally. "Sybil mentioned it." Nate nodded. "After 4 years. The financial restitution payments will continue for another decade, though." "And the child?" "Still with her sister in Seattle. 7 years old now." Nate's expression softened. "I've established a trust fund for his education, anonymous, of course." "That's generous of you," Maeve said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "It seemed right," he replied simply. "Children shouldn't suffer for their parents' mistakes." The conversation shifted to professional updates. Maeve's upcoming sabbatical to write her 4th novel, Nate's transition to full-time foundation work after finally stepping down as chairman of Prescott Investments. "Marcus has taken the company in exciting directions," Nate told her. "The ethical reforms we implemented after the scandal have become a case study at business schools, something good emerging from something terrible. That seems to be the pattern," Maeve reflected. "The foundation, my books, your reforms, we've both tried to create meaning from what happened." "Does it help?" Nate asked, the question carrying layers of unspoken weight. Does any of it actually heal what was broken? Maeve considered this thoughtfully. Not in the way I once hoped, she admitted. For years I thought there would be some moment of complete resolution, a book published, justice served, cancer defeated, that would restore me to wholeness. But that moment never came. So what did? He asked softly. The recognition that wholeness isn't what I once thought, she said. It's not the absence of scars, but the integration of them into a new self. The cancer changed me. The betrayal changed me. My response to both changed me further. She looked at him directly. I'm not the woman you married, Nate. That person is gone. But I've come to value who I am now, scars and all. Nate nodded slowly. I understand that better than you might think. The man who betrayed you, who couldn't face your illness, who sought escape in the worst possible way. I barely recognize him now, yet I have to own him, integrate him into who I've become. The honesty between them felt like a gift, perhaps the only meaningful one possible after what they had experienced. I'm seeing someone, Maeve said after a moment, a literature professor from UCLA. We met at a conference last year. I'm happy for you, Nate replied, and she could tell he meant it. Does he treat you well? He does. It's still new, still careful, but good. She hesitated. And you? There's been no one serious, he admitted. A few dates here and there. Nothing lasting. The unspoken truth hung between them, that some betrayals alter not just the relationship they damage, but all potential relationships that follow. For Maeve, it had meant years of cautious self-protection before allowing new vulnerability. For Nate, it had meant a deeper reckoning with his capacity for moral failure that made intimacy a fraught proposition. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the courtyard, they rose to leave, aware that they were each due at separate evening events. Maeve, Nate said as they prepared to part, there's something I've wanted to ask for years but never found the right moment. The evidence you gathered against Vanessa and Elliot, was that revenge for what I did? For us? Her answer came without hesitation. Not revenge, justice. There's a difference. But was it worth it? He pressed. The time, the energy, the emotional toll of reliving the betrayal through investigation and your novel. At the time, absolutely, she said firmly. It was necessary for me to reclaim agency when so much had been taken from me. My health temporarily, my marriage permanently. She paused, considering her next words carefully. But if you're asking whether it restored what was lost, no, nothing could do that. Nate nodded, understanding the distinction. The foundation is the same for me. Necessary, meaningful, but not redemptive in the way I once hoped. Perhaps that's the final lesson, Maeve suggested. That true healing isn't about restoration of what was, but creation of what can be. As they walked toward the parking lot, Nate hesitated before asking one last question. Do you ever wonder what might have happened if I had made different choices? If I had been stronger during your illness? Maeve stopped, turning to face him fully. Sometimes, she admitted, but those thoughts lead nowhere useful. We live with the choices made, not the ones imagined. Fair enough, he acknowledged. Thank you for your honesty, today and always. They embraced briefly, a gesture that would have been impossible in earlier years, but now felt appropriate. A physical acknowledgement of their shared journey from intimate partners to respectful former spouses who had each found meaning in the aftermath of betrayal. Good luck with the new novel, Nate said as they separated. And you with the foundation expansion, Maeve replied. They walked away in different directions, each carrying pieces of their shared past into distinct futures. Above them, the late afternoon sun broke through clouds, casting long shadows across the campus where their story had begun so many years before. Later that evening, after her dinner engagement, Maeve stood on the balcony of her hotel room overlooking San Francisco Bay. The city lights glittered against the darkness, beautiful and distant, much like her memories of the life she had once lived there with Nate. Her phone chimed with a message from her new partner. Hope your talk went well. Miss you. Looking forward to your return to LA. She smiled as she typed a warm response, grateful for this unexpected chapter in her life. At 50, she had found a kind of peace she wouldn't have believed possible during those dark days of cancer treatment and discovery of betrayal. Not the peace of forgetting, or even of complete forgiveness, but the deeper peace that comes from integrating painful experience into a meaningful narrative. As a novelist, Maeve understood better than most that powerful stories rarely follow simple arcs of triumph or tragedy. The most compelling tales, in literature and in life, embrace complexity, acknowledge ambiguity, and recognize that healing often coexists with persistent pain. Her debut novel, Breached Trust, continued to find new readers each year, its exploration of betrayal and justice resonating with those navigating their own broken promises and fractured relationships. But it was her later works, focusing on reconstruction rather than revelation, that she believed would prove more enduring. Watching a ferry cross the bay, its lights marking a steady path through darkness, Maeve reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She had sought justice and found it. She had written truth disguised as fiction and watched it illuminate others' paths. She had rebuilt a life that cancer and betrayal had threatened to destroy. The victory, she had come to understand, wasn't in the exposure of wrongdoing, or even in her professional success that had followed. It was in the daily act of choosing to write her own story, rather than remaining defined by what others had done to her. In reclaiming her narrative, not through revenge but through creation, she had found something more valuable than justice. She had found herself. As San Francisco's fog began rolling in across the bay, softening the city's sharp edges, just as time had softened the jagged edges of betrayal, Maeve turned away from the view and back toward her laptop, where her next novel waited. A story not about what had been lost, but about what might yet be found. If this story touched your heart and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.